Good evening and welcome to a special debate ahead of the local elections on Thursday. We're fed up with tax, housing, the cost of living and public services and don't really trust anyone to fix it. That's the finding of our exclusive poll tonight. It sounds the alarm for all the main parties. 9 months after the general election landslide, we can see just how loveless it was. In the areas voting this week, Labour has crashed to 18%. But it's the Tories who have the most to lose because they hold most of the seats being contested. And in our poll, they're still haemorrhaging support to Reform UK. However, while 26% say they'd vote for Reform, there's little sign voters believe the party actually has the answers. In fact, when you ask people who does, the biggest response by far is none of the above. So tonight, our audience put Labour, the Tories, Lib Dems, Greens and Reform on the spot on the issues they care about. Well, joining us here in Hull are representatives of the 5 main political parties in England. Steve Reid from Labour, who is Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. From the Conservatives, Kevin Hollingreich, the Shadow Cabinet Member for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Daisy Cooper is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats and their Treasury spokesperson. From the Reform Party, Alex Wilson, who's a member of the London Assembly, and the co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, Adrian Ramsey, is here as well. So there's a huge amount to debate, but let's start with local government services and local taxes and go to a question from a member of our audience, Ken Patterson. Ken, where are you?
Good evening all. We pay more for our council taxes and get a poorer service. National and local services have both been heavily degraded over the past few years. I have a 7-year-old son who has special needs and will be increasingly reliant on social services to help with his care. How do the panel propose to go about preserving these things and putting people before potholes?
Steve Reid.
Yeah, well, of course, you talk about council tax, and council tax went up every single year under the previous Conservative government, including when Kemi Badenoch, their current leader, was the Minister for Local Government. And yet, as you describe, services got worse. We see more potholes, we see more rubbish on our streets, but critical services, like services for kids with special educational needs, have been pared back to the bone. So what Labour is doing is we're focusing on giving better value for money. Labour councils charge you £300 less a year on average in your council tax, but we've got a Labour government that will work with councils. We've taken some difficult decisions to solve some of these problems, and we closed the VAT loophole on private schools to raise over £760 million that we are now using to create thousands more places for kids that need special educational needs. That is to give them the start that they need in life to improve their chances of having the most access to opportunity. Because there's no point all of us being in politics if we're not focused on supporting those who need help the most. But we'll always do it in a way that looks after the taxpayer too. That's why Labour councils will charge you less council tax than Conservatives, Lib Dems or any of the other parties.
Kevin Hollingreich.
Well, I hope you get the support you need for your son. It must be a very worrying time for you and your family. We are seeing rising incidence of children needing special educational needs support. 140% increase since 2015. It's one of the things that a major cost pressure for local authorities. And we put an extra £11 billion, £10.7 billion in to try and help. The most important thing, of course, and I quite understand your point about services being degraded, but taxes are going higher, because there are huge demands on the system, and that's why you need local authorities that are run well. And that's what you get from Conservative councils. Our services are better. We repair 5 times as many roads, or the length of roads, than any other party. 3 times less likely to suffer from fly tipping. The services you get down the road, I don't know what particular area you're in, but Lincolnshire County Council are rated excellent for children's services, outstanding for children's services. So these are the kind of services you want. That's what's at risk when you cast your vote on Thursday. You've got to make sure you vote for the best possible councillor and the best possible council that's going to give you that support. And one of the things we wanted to do if we had won the last election, was to bring forward a national system in terms of special educational needs to try and solve those kind of problems for your son.
Daisy Cooper.
Yeah. Look, time and again, I meet with families who feel like they are hitting their heads against a brick wall trying to get special educational needs services that their children need. And often their lives are thrown into complete disarray because they are picking up the pieces of a broken social care system. And I know just how infuriating it is when you're desperate to get help for a loved one and you just can't access it. In both cases, we Liberal Democrats have said that you can invest to save. So if we invest as a country in social care, we can actually alleviate the costs on the NHS. And when it comes to special educational needs, if we provide that training up front, if we give more support and funding to schools, we can then stop this perverse and ridiculous situation where parents are left to go to court to spend millions of pounds on tribunals just to get the support that their children so desperately need. So there are ways of improving these services. We have those plans, and we really hope the Labour government listen to what we're saying and take them up.
OK, the question was much broader than just special educational needs. Alex Wilson.
Yes, very good question. These are local elections. They are about local services that are being delivered in local communities up and down the country. And we are facing a situation where, as with national government, local government is broken. And a big part of that is that there is too much waste, there is too much debt, and these councils are servicing huge volumes of debt. The councils that are up for election on Thursday, in aggregate, owe about £12 billion, and the interest alone on that is costing £1.3 million every day. So the first thing is that we need to get back on control of the finances. We need to audit these councils properly. We need a fresh look. We need new councillors who will take their experience from outside of politics.
Do you mean cuts?
Can you promise that you're not going to cut SEND services? Can you promise that you will not cut SEND services come Thursday? If reform run any councils at all, can you promise you will not cut social care or SEND services?
I can't promise what any new council administration will do.
Wow.
Because that is up,
so you cannot
for those
promise,
who are going to be elected
you cannot
on
promise
Thursday.
you're not going to cut SEND services.
What I can promise
Gosh.
is that the mindset that new councillors will come in, will look at things very carefully, very, very closely, and we need to get the finances right. We need to stop the bleeding before we can treat the patient. This is what local government say. It's broken, it needs fixing.
Daisy, can you make that promise?
In my local area, what I can tell you is that we have a plan.
Can you make the promise you asked him to make?
Lots of Liberal Democrat-run councillors are looking at SEND services, and they're looking at the contracts that have been put out time and time again. We will do everything in our power to protect SEND services, but all we hear from Reform is they think these are made up. They think that it's made up conditions. We take SEND seriously, and we are fighting tooth and nail in Parliament and in county halls around the country.
Adrian Ramsey.
Well, I don't think anyone knows what Reform councillors would do, because the reality is they have no track record at any level of government, and people are looking at parties that do have that track record, as a record number of Green councillors around the country do. But the story that you shared with us is all too common, and I had a constituent come to me, a common story recently, where her daughter had got an education, health and care plan, but had not been given access to the support she needed, to the right sort of placement in school, and had been out of school for a whole year. And that's just a totally unacceptable situation. The fact is that whether it's special educational needs, whether it's social care, whether it's nationally provided services like the NHS, we are seeing our public services run down because the last government and now this one have not been willing to put the money in. They've been starving local councils of the investment that's needed and presenting it like there's no option. But we could ask the very richest in society, the multimillionaires, the billionaires, to pay a bit more in tax so we can invest in the services that we all need.
Steve Reed, it's a fair point. I mean, over and over again, you hear people saying, we thought Labour would be different, and nothing's changed.
Well, Labour's just, the budget that we passed last year increased spending nationally by 3%, despite the incredible inheritance we got from the Tories with a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. And local government has had an increase of nearly 7% in their funding. That's the biggest increase that they've had for years. And we want councils to start focusing on fixing the problems that people are bothered about. Fly tipping on their streets, people are furious about. We've got more potholes on the roads in England than there are craters on the moon. We need councils to get serious about spending that money to fix the things that people...
Steve, why am I
record for fly tipping? Labour council's got the worst record.
Do you know which council's got the highest fly tipping in the whole country? Croydon. And it's run by the Conservative Party. It's run by the Tories, and they've made it an absolute disgrace. If you want to talk about fly tipping, we're going to crack down on fly tippers. I believe that those who make the mess should clear up the mess. So we're going to make people join clean-up squads, as a deterrent to those who are thinking of fly tipping, a punishment for those that have done it, and to make sure that our roads are much cleaner than they were allowed to get under the Conservative Party.
If Labour's putting enough money into local services, then why am I getting head teachers in my constituency saying that they're going to have to look at whether they might need to make redundancies?
Well, after 14 years of the Tories, Adrian, you can't fix everything overnight.
Why am I getting my local integrated care board saying they're going to need to close the walk-in centre?
Adrian, nobody believes you can fix 14 years of Tory failure overnight.
36 of the worst 50 local councils for fly tapping are run by Labour. Just face the facts. You are failing time and time again in terms of these kind of problems.
Fly tipping has become an epidemic in the country because fly tippers got away with it scot-free under the Conservative government.
But why
if
the
they
Labour
knew that
councils
when they
worse
were
then?
doing it, they were going to have to join clean-up squads and clean up the mess they made, they would think twice before they did
bring
the fly
in some
tipping.
people from your... Who wants to talk about local services? You had your hand up on the front row in the black T-shirt.
Yeah, I've spoiled my ballot for the last few elections because I, similar to the poll that was mentioned, just don't believe that any of your parties either can or want to do anything about it. Our local community does a lot on their own. I'm part of a group called Cooperation Hull, and we don't pay a lot of attention, frankly, to local councils. We go and do things on our own. We have community savings clubs, we do clean-ups, we have community food buying corporations as well. Have you got anything to motivate people to come out?
Can I ask you, you're not interested in the New Kids on the Block and reform?
No. I think it's a lot of bluster and headlines and clickbait, similar to the other parties, to be fair. But
Okay.
No.
I mean, Daisy Cooper, how are you going to reach him and everyone like him?
So right around the country, we Liberal Democrats pride ourselves on being community champions because normally we are part of those groups. So I think about councillors in my area and around the country, and Liberal Democrat councillors are typically the kind of people who are working, volunteering at the food bank, who are doing the friendship groups, who are volunteering to support people who are having their meals on wheels and things like that. So we're rooted in our communities and we can see the amazing good that volunteer groups do. But at the same time, we share those frustrations that government, whether it's local government or national government, are not always on the side of those community groups. And actually what you really want is community groups and local councils working hand in glove, and that's what you can deliver, and that's what Liberal Democrats do right around the country.
Alex,
and I hope you have the chance to see that here.
Well, for the first and possibly only time tonight, I'm going to agree with Adrian. We don't have a track record of delivering local government, but that means we don't have a track record of failure. We've had, we can see the old parties arguing, squabbling about their records, and they have all let everybody down. And it goes back to the heart of the original question. Over the last few years, we have seen council tax being raised every year by pretty much the maximum it's allowed to be raised, and we haven't got the services that we need. We have a million potholes across this country.
Reform, why did reform not mention councils or local government even once in your manifesto? Not once.
Can I just say to you, I mean, I get your kind of disillusionment with politics. I think every single politician I've met, of whatever party, does go into politics to try and solve these problems. I know we don't get it right all the time, but that's what we do. And I admire what you do in terms of the community level. Of course, things will always be delivered more effectively by local people like you doing the right thing, and there are clearly millions of people around the country do the same thing. We're just going to make it easy for you to do that.
Let me just get a couple of thoughts from the audience rather than questions, because we're in... Yes, on the front row here, the lady in the brown shirt. Just get the microphone to you. Yeah.
I feel that all the councils were run down for over 14 years under the Conservative government. All of them. They've all had issues. The budget's been much lower. It's about funding, and Labour haven't been in that long, and I do know that they are getting more money, and it's going to take time, and I think it's just a little bit early to start getting so disillusioned.
Yeah, you had your hand up as well.
I just found it a bit ridiculous that we're on about disillusionment, but within seconds of the debate starting, days, you immediately cut off reform and started trying to give them a gotcha question. I'm not voting for reform, but I disagree with that sort of culture that we've got into, where you're interrupting each other, not letting each other finish. In Beverley today, Reform, Labour and Conservatives were out, but they were actually listening to each other, having a discussion. Why can't you do that in front of us? You cannot control what each council does. Lib Dems are spending 20 million on Queen's Gardens. Council taxes have gone up in Hull and East Riding. You can't control that. You're national politicians. Local councils are separate from you.
Okay, and just finally, the lady on the end here.
It absolutely is about the local funding. I have a son who currently has a brain injury, and he has had to move out of his home because the landlord wants to sell. Take it back 10 years ago, lots of council properties, they're overrun, there's not enough housing, and his only option is to live in a hostel. How can he live in a hostel with a brain injury? He can't. It's absolutely impossible. There is such a housing crisis, and again, goes back to local funding. Everything, no matter what.
Okay, well, Steve Reid, I mean, you've got to answer this question because it's come up a couple of times. The truth is, local government's been massively underfunded and asked to do more.
It has. I used to be a council leader myself, and I saw the cuts that came in under the Tories. It's become impossible to run the services
But 3%
that councils need.
Does it?
So that's within our first 6 months in power. After 14 years, you need time to start to fix those problems. I think there's a deeper problem beneath all of this, though, which is people feel so let down after the last 14 years that they've lost trust in politics. I think the social action that you're speaking about there is very important, but people won't put faith back in politics until they see the visible change that they want to see. That's why this government is focused on our plan for change. So we've given people a pay rise by increasing the national minimum wage. We've cut NHS waiting lists for 6 months in a row. We're making polluting water bosses face up to 2 years in jail for what they've done. We've set up GEP Energy to cut people's energy bills. We're putting 13,000 more police on the streets to tackle crime, and we've removed 24,000 people from the country who had no right to be here. That's not everything. In 10 months, we've done more than the Tories did in 14 years.
Adrian, do you have an answer for this lady here?
And Labour councillors.
Yes, I did want to pick up on this lady's question, because we absolutely have a dire lack of affordable housing in this country. I see this in my constituency and around the country, where the homes that are being built are just not affordable to local people. There's nowhere near enough social housing, which is about councils having the funding and the borrowing power to build new affordable housing, as you've said. It's also about being tough with developers.
But isn't the trouble also that, you know, when it comes to your local areas, you end up being a bit of a NIMBY?
No,
all of a sudden you don't like pylons.
I'm very clear, Christian, that I want to see more affordable housing. My constituents are saying what this lady is saying. There isn't enough affordable housing, and the developments that are happening, the government's just letting a developer's charter go ahead where they build what they want to, executive homes that don't meet local people's needs, and that's the issue that we've got to
Right, Daisy and then Kevin briefly, but yeah.
So, since basically Margaret Thatcher sold off a whole load of social housing and the profits never got reinvested, we have constantly had demand outstripping supply. We have got to build more social homes. We went into the general election saying we would commit to having 150,000 social homes being built every single year. Under the Conservatives, when they're in power from 2015 to 2024, it was an average of 7,000, where we need 150,000. So the first thing is we have got to build more social homes, and I really hope the Labour government finally come up with a target soon, because they don't have one yet. We've got to, I think, regulate Airbnbs, because we've got a lot of people who have all these flats and they rent them out for a Friday night, Saturday night, when people could be living there and building their lives in those communities. We've got to have a use it or lose it rule for developers who can land bank and sit on pieces of land.
And will Liberal Democrat councils allow the development?
Absolutely.
Because Liberal Democrats can be pretty NIMBY as well.
Look at Eastleigh, look at Kingston in London, look at Portsmouth, look at Oby and Wigton. These are councils. I mean, Eastleigh is building more homes than it's even been told it has to build, because we believe in council and social housing. Those are the homes that our communities really need. The problem we have at the moment is that the Conservatives and now Labour have a top-down system that doesn't deliver the homes that we need to end homelessness and years-long waiting lists, but it does destroy green fields in the process.
Kevin Hollingray.
Well, that's not true, Daisy, because we all work on local plans which are developed locally. But you're right to say there is huge pressure on the housing system. And one thing Steve and I will agree on, we need to build more homes. The target of 1.5 million homes we support. We built 1 million homes in the last Parliament, which were record levels for 50 years. And we've delivered 600,000 more affordable homes since 2010. So there has been action moving forward. Yes, it needs to be more ambitious, but also we need houses for your son, who I'm sorry to hear about his circumstances. But what the question that Steve can't answer, I don't think, is if you want to build a lot more social homes, which are much cheaper, Daisy refers to, that costs an awful lot of money. And people, in my view, don't want their taxes to increase. You've got to make the books balance. That's why it was a difficult period for funding for local authorities, because you've got to balance the books. That's what we attempt to do against very difficult circumstances, or against the backdrop of rising demand for services.
Very briefly.
that's the reality we're in.
This government is committed to building 1.5 million new homes over the course of this government, and we're doing it by reforming the planning rules, because it is the planning rules that have got in the way. And I've got to say, from when I was a councillor, a Lib Dem candidate blocked a housing development for 3 years when there were homes that people needed to live in.
But you're going to stop them doing that.
We need to take off the blockers and support the builders and get the homes that people need to buy or to rent, so they've got a decent place to live in and they can lead a dignified life.
But you're calling the blockers the council members. You're taking away the ability for a elected member of a council to be able to vote against an individual planning application. That's what you're calling the blockers.
Because, Kevin, if you do it building by building, you don't ever get anything built. What we're having people and councillors do is they will choose the kind of homes and where they want them to be as part of a framework, then they will get built. But if you let Tories and Lib Dems and Greens and Reform block every single home,
we're going to move on.
They're never going to have anywhere to
I'm going to move on to another... No, hang on.
Planning applications are approved by local councils.
Daisy.
Local councils are not the problem in this.
I'm going to move on to another question, which broadens it a little bit. And this is from Sarah Greaves. Sarah, where are you? Sarah, yes.
Evening. I run a small independent business on a high street that is dying due to ridiculous rents and business rates. It feels like the economy in this country is being mismanaged for everyone. People haven't any spare cash. The cost of living crisis is killing growth and businesses like mine. What do the panel suggest?
Kevin, this is your legacy.
There is no doubt times are tough on the high street. There's no doubt about it in terms of the changing consumer habits, but also in terms of the extra costs that you're having to bear. Now, we stepped in through the COVID crisis and afterwards through the cost of living crisis to moderate your costs to the tune of about £500 billion, including energy support and grants and business rates discounts, which have been halved by Labour. That's the reality. And your cost pressures are now going through the roof because of that and because of the national insurance rise, which Labour promised they would not do, and because of the extra red tape that's coming down the track for you in terms of employment regulations. I was in business for 30 years. I have every sympathy for you in trying to make ends meet on the high street. It is very tough. We should make it easier for you to do business and to make profit, not more difficult. That's not what you're seeing here.
Thank you. Again, fantastic question. It cuts right to the heart of a really, really important issue that's facing high streets up and down the country. The small businesses and independent businesses are the lifeblood of our economy, and they need to be supported far more effectively than they have been done up till now. As a first step, we would want to abolish business rates for high street small and medium-sized enterprises, so give that bit of relief, and to fund that we'd have to impose an online sales tax on the Amazons of this world. So we level the playing field, make it easier for small and local businesses to compete. But there's a wider question about economic management and the cost of living, the cost of government. We've talked about council tax going up. There's the national insurance hike in particular will be killing small businesses, hospitality, retail, independent businesses, low-paid, part-time, and new workers coming into the workforce. It's an absolute a noose around the neck of people like you and the business that you're trying to create. First of all, we need to have a government that understands what it means to run a business. We have a front bench, a government front bench. Not a single one has run a business. Not a single one had to employ people.
But what's your plan? I mean, Rupert Lowe, published this very detailed text the other day, your former MP, saying you don't have any plans.
But that simply
you don't have any policies.
That simply isn't true. I've just said we would want to abolish business rates for high street-based SMEs, and I say offset.
How much would you raise?
And we also want to make we need to get incentives back. So we want to raise the thresholds for things like corporation tax, VAT, to support small businesses directly. And if you do that, you will get more businesses
Alex,
growing, and you'll pay for it by growing more.
Be honest with people.
This is what you used to believe in. Your party used to believe.
Listen,
cutting taxes, growing the economy, getting people in work.
Exactly what I do believe in.
And if your party did it, I wouldn't need to be here. Reform wouldn't need to exist.
I also live in the real world. In terms of the online sales tax, it sounds good in principle. We imposed a digital services tax on some of those big retailers you're talking about. They passed that cost straight on to consumers. You be honest with the people here and the people at home, those costs of an online sales tax would be added to prices by those platforms. That is the reality. Prices would go up.
Can I say, first off, I worked in business myself for 16 years, so it's not true what you just said, Alex. But I've been speaking to the people that run shops on my local high street in South London, and they will tell me the reason that people aren't coming and using the shops is because they haven't got enough money in their pockets anymore. So this government is focusing on dealing with that aspect of the cost of living crisis. So we've raised the national minimum wage to give 3 million of our lowest paid working people a pay rise. And right now, for the first time in years, wages are going up faster than prices. It's a slow process, but it means that we are starting to put more money back in people's pockets and starting to turn the corner. And the reason you hear this government talk all the time about growth, investing in building more homes, investing in upgrade the water infrastructure, investing in clean energy infrastructure, is because that means jobs and investment in every part of the country, and that means money in people's pockets to fix the cost of living crisis, get them out.
But you put up national insurance.
Yes.
And that came out of people's pockets. And that's what people are angry about.
Did, but you know, you hear from the Tories an awful lot about the national insurance increase, but they don't tell us what they would cut.
Yes, I do.
When we have to remove the 26 million pounds we put into the National Health Service and have cut waiting lists for 6 months in a row after they rose to their highest ever level under your party.
That's not true.
If you have people sitting at home because they can't get a hospital appointment, they stay on benefits, they're not earning money, they're not contributing either through work or to the exchequer.
So I think perhaps let's focus on some solutions. So I'm an absolute high street champion. I love high streets because it's not just about supporting small businesses. They make our communities what they are. They're the glue that hold our communities together. And our high streets aren't just a row of shops. So people go to have festivals. It's where they celebrate. It's where they congregate. It's where they make memories with their friends and families. So our high streets are so critical to our culture here in Britain. So here are some things we could do. Replace business rates with a commercial landowner levy, which basically means that it would be the landowners who would be paying it, so we would even it out between small high streets and big Amazon warehouses. It is absurd that under the current system, Amazon warehouses often see their business rates going down, whilst high street shops see their business rates going up. So we can change that system, replace it with something that's much fairer. The second thing is that I do think the jobs tax has made things a lot harder for small businesses. I think what the Labour government could have done is raise the same amount of money for the NHS, which is what they were trying to do, but raise that money in a much fairer way. And we have said, actually, rather than imposing a jobs tax, which hits some of our smallest businesses, you could instead look to raise money from the big tech giants, from the big banks, from the big water companies, from the big online gaming companies, all these companies that are making billions of pounds in profits that could afford to pay a little bit more to get our public services back on their feet. But our high streets are the lifeblood of our communities. We've got to do everything to protect them.
Adrian Ramsey.
Well, I'm also used to running organisations, needing to make the books balance, employing people, and I know just how hard it is for small businesses, which are so crucial to our communities, the lifeblood of our economy, and it's being made harder by a government that is putting up employers' national insurance, which I think is particularly impacting smaller businesses, as well as charities that are also impacted by this, and the care sector and elsewhere. I've challenged that and voted against that in Parliament several times. But while small businesses are struggling, the biggest corporations in this country are getting richer, and we're not getting that balance right. It's the same as with society as a whole. The poor are getting poorer, with the government's books being balanced on the back of disabled people. And while people are having money taken out of their pockets, that's not only really bad for those people, it means they're not then spending it in your shop and in the local cafe. So we've got to really think about how this is going to work and how we're going to support the most vulnerable people in society.
Okay. Well, I mean, the cost of living is also about geopolitics. Now, it's not just about, what this government or even councils will do. So let's bring in a question from George Mitchell. George, where are you? Yeah, front row.
Evening, everyone. Evening. How do you think we should deal with Trump's trade war?
Right. Daisy Cooper.
I think the first thing we've got to do is talk tough. I think there's only one language that Donald Trump understands, and that is the language of strength. And so we should be talking tough. And we've urged the government to launch a Buy British campaign so we can show that we're not going to take those tariffs lying down. The second thing is we've got to realign our economic alliances. We've got to work with our European and Commonwealth allies to create an economic coalition of the willing to stand up collectively against Donald Trump's tariffs as well. And the third thing we've got to do is make sure that if we're going to have a negotiation with the US about a trade deal, when you go into a negotiation, you have to show that there is another option on the table. And we've said, actually, it is possible to get a trade deal with the US on services, but at the same time, we need a trade deal with the EU on goods. And we think that the government should be accelerating those negotiations to get a customs union with the EU as quickly as possible to boost trade for British businesses.
Alex, if Nigel Farage was Prime Minister, you'd be cozying up to Trump and doing everything he says, wouldn't you?
I think if Nigel Farage was Prime Minister, we'd have a much stronger chance of getting the deal that we need, and because he has that relationship with Don. He's a critical friend, but he is a friend nonetheless, but he is critical nonetheless. And,
But do you accept that Trump's trade war is harming the cost of living for ordinary people?
The idea of tariffs as a general principle is one that I am very much against. It doesn't help anybody to be putting tariffs on here and responding and then responding and responding and escalating. It doesn't help anybody at all, and I would like this to be dealt with. I would like it to reach a conclusion. I would like us to have a trade deal that means we can get through this and be in a stronger position than we would otherwise be. But the overall cost of living, it's an issue that has got so many different components that are coming into it, and one that hasn't been mentioned yet is the cost of energy. You mentioned GB Energy has been set up to try and cut energy bills. Instead, the cap has gone up twice already, and will continue to do so because all of the parties here are dedicated to net zero and the cost.
We're talking about trade wars and Trump for now, though. I mean, Steve Reid, do you not look at Mark Carney in Canada, who has now seen off a sort of a right-wing coalition? His party were going to be out on their ear. Suddenly he's hugely popular. Do you not think that they've got the right idea when it comes to dealing with Trump?
Well, congratulations to Mark Carney on winning that election. I think he's done a fantastic job.
Do you not think British people would like to stand up for Britain as well?
Mark is standing up for the Canadian national interest. Our government must stand up for the British national interest. The European Union is our biggest trading partner. The United States is our second biggest trading partner. We need to do a trade deal with both of them. It would be very hard to imagine Nigel Farage doing a good trade deal with the European Union. Now, we're currently negotiating with both of those big trading blocs because we need to get more British goods moving across the borders and into those countries. British food exports went down 20% since 2018 because of the trade barriers the Tories erected. We're negotiating to take down those trade barriers, get British food exports moving across the border again and get the money back into British businesses and British workers' pockets. But we will do that with the European Union, we'll do it with the United States, we'll do it with India, we'll do it where we need to do it, but we will always act in the interest of working people in this country.
Yes, on the back row there in the orange T-shirt.
I understand, since we're on the topic of personal and familial advancements, I am a man of divorce, and though my family was fortunate, I mean, it was not pretty in my opinion. What do you believe ought to be done to help the advancement of the children of these families and certainly the mothers of these families in terms of affordable housing?
I'm going to thank you for your point, but we've touched on housing already, and I want to try and keep it on this particular question of the trade wars and what we might do about it. You had your hand up as well, yeah.
Yes. What does the panel, what would they suggest and commit to the public today about securing British farms and our British produce we produce in this country? It is internationally renowned as the best quality food in the world, and our farms are being taxed, and recently with the family farm tax, we won't be able to afford to produce the food in this country anymore.
Adrian.
Well, I represent a very rural constituency in East Anglia, so I speak to farmers all the time, and we've had too many occasions where, particularly under the Conservatives, there were trade deals agreed that were bad for our farmers, where those trade deals were undercutting British farming, and there's a risk of that in relation to the United States, especially if we end up with an appalling situation around chlorinated chicken and undermining animal welfare standards. But what this shows is both the situation with President Trump throwing his weight around, and we've got to stand up to him, but also with climate breakdown, with the war in Ukraine and so on. We are not resilient in terms of our food supply. We need to be producing far more of the food that we need within the UK, within our regions. There's huge opportunities with our farmers to do that, and yet the government's pulled the rug from underneath it. Steve's own department have pulled the rug from underneath our farmers by freezing the sustainable farming incentive with no notice. We're not getting the support that's needed. Farmers tell me all the time it's too difficult to access those payments for nature-friendly farming, and the budgets are not big enough. I know farmers want to do the right thing, and we need to support them.
Kevin, I mean, you know, there's a bigger context here as well, isn't there, within our economic malaise at the moment, which is we kind of need to assess the position we are outside Europe. Now, we see the government sort of renegotiating with Europe and considering visas for young people. I mean, you weren't in favour of Brexit. Do you think we should be sort of straightforward about the damage that it's done to our economy now?
I think you should be clear about some of the problems, particularly SMEs are facing in terms of trading with the European Union, and there is an opportunity outside the European Union. I've never, ever argued that the UK can't survive outside the European Union. Can I answer the point that young gentleman asked? The first thing we should do, the government should do, is reverse the family farm tax. It is so bad, so pernicious. It is not just you being able to find a few tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's about you selling your farm. And the worst thing is Labour said they wouldn't. Steve himself said they would not impose inheritance tax on farms and businesses and pensions. Huge taxation that will completely change how you do business. The point here about President Trump, the Trump storm will pass. But in the meantime, we've got to batten down the hatches. You are lucky in this area because you're actually, those who live in the East Riding of Yorkshire, Conservative Controlled Council, is the fastest growing economic region in the UK.
What makes you
That's
think the
what we
Trump
need.
storm will pass? He's just got into power.
Because it's in everybody's interest. It's in everybody's interest to trade fairly and freely across the developed world. That is everybody's interest and President Trump's interest. His interests ultimately preside. Of course, we should look for a free trade agreement at the same time with President Trump. Daisy's saying about the European Union, it's a nice thought, but if you strike a customs deal with the European Union, you completely lock yourself out of a trade deal with the US. The US is our biggest market. Yes, it would.
You can't just wish President Trump away. He is there, and we're going to have to negotiate with him, and we'll do that in the national interest. But on the point about farming, I don't actually think it is unreasonable to ask farm businesses to pay their fair share in inheritance tax when the farmer dies, just like any other business would do. And in fact, what farms have been offered is only paying 50% of the inheritance tax that other businesses would have to pay. The problem with farming isn't what happens when a farmer is dead. It's what's going on while the farmers are alive, because they became completely unprofitable under the Conservative Party. So we are focused we are focused on doing what we can to support farming. So we've ruled out the kind of trade deals like they did with Australia that undermine farmers on environmental, and you speak to farmers and they'll tell you, undermine them on environmental and welfare standards. In the budget, despite the inheritance we have from the Conservatives, we set the biggest ever budget, £2.4 billion over 2 years, biggest ever budget for sustainable food production and nature that has ever been set in this country.
You just move one budget into another.
We got it all out the door in the hands of farmers. So we are supporting farmers to become profitable. It's what happens when farmers are alive.
So one of the points that goes completely overlooked when it comes to farming is that we are an island nation. We have to be able to feed ourselves, and whether it's our national security, whether it's our energy security or our food security, all three of those are incredibly fragile right now. Now, when it comes to the family farm tax, I would have been in favour of anything the government did to close that loophole which is being exploited by private equity companies and celebrity farmers to get out of paying inheritance tax. I would have supported that measure to close that loophole. But in trying to do that, what the government inadvertently done, I think, is to target genuine family farms that are actually operating on a tiny, tiny margin. And we know that if they're forced to sell, it'll be the private equity companies that sell it up, and we lose those farms forever.
Daisy, if farmers hand over the farms, if they retire in their 60s, let's say, and they hand over the farms, they're not going to have to pay anything if they pass it on. Cost zero.
So basically what you're saying is that they have to plan when they die.
Well, every business has. What business doesn't plan for succession?
How can you plan?
Maybe you've never been in business, but if you're in business, you succession plan.
Right,
it's normal.
How can you do that when you need
every single business?
How can you do that when you might be only 1 or 2 years away from death? Because I've met farmers like that.
But every single business is in this situation, Kevin.
But they are now.
Every single business.
They are now.
No, in every sector of the economy, not just in farming.
No, businesses.
You're trying to make it optional.
No, that's not.
But it was your
this is completely
wrong.
Unprofitable. Business property relief.
You did that deal that undercut farmers.
Totally wrong.
I'm just going to end this round by coming back to George, who asked this question. What's your own answer as where we should be? You're what? You're 18 years old?
Yeah, that's right.
Worried about your future? What do you think they should do?
Look, selfishly, I've got plans. I'd like to work on the continent and travel freely, so naturally it suits me to join the EU, but from
You want to join the EU again?
I would.
How old were you when we Brexited?
I was 9. So times change, but
times change.
18 years old now, looking to move to the continent. I quite like the idea of rejoining.
Okay.
And personally, from hearing the discussions today, I don't really feel as though the UK is strong enough by itself to talk tough to President Trump. Personally, I'd feel as though we'd be much stronger with a customs union, a single market, even the entire EU, but definitely a single market. Like, do you guys agree with that? That would be much stronger with a
We're going to hold that as a rhetorical question. Thank you very much indeed for your thought, George. In the last section of the programme, let's discuss the state of our politics and voters' trust in it. And we'll have a question from Parry Apsara. Parry.
With Good evening. With faith in politics at an all-time low, is our system broken?
Alex.
No, but there is a risk that it could be. But what is really important is that everybody does engage in the system. We are a liberal democracy, we have been for many, many years, and we should be proud of the fact that at every level of government in this country we have a system which enables the peaceful transfer of power without bloodshed from one administration to another. And all 5 of us on this panel, I think, can agree that that is a good thing. But for too long, the established parties have let people down. We've had promises that have been broken, promises that have not been delivered, and services failing, taxes rising, all these issues that we've touched on earlier on in the discussion. So it's been a very interesting campaign. I've been going around in various different parts of the country, knocking on doors, doing street stalls, leafleting, talking to people and trying to find out what really is going on. And there is a big kind of sense of kind of flux, of change, wanting to look for something different, and that's what we are trying to do with reform. We are a new party.
But you do want to change the system, don't you? Because you believe in proportional representation.
We do, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin, we used to have 2 main parties. We don't. I mean, the times were we try and do a debate with just Labour and the Tories on the stage. Now there's 5 of you. Everything's changed.
It's a change right now, but I don't think that's a permanent change. I understand why people have lost confidence at this point in time in us. There's many things we got right over the last 14 years, but we got some things wrong. I mean, the UK is the 4th largest global trading nation in the world. It was 7th, 3rd fastest growing economy in the G7, 2nd largest exporter of services in the world. We've got more entrepreneurial businesses called unicorns than Germany, France, Sweden put together. Reading standards, school standards have raised significantly since 2010. Many things we got right, some things we got wrong, and there are some specific challenges any party would have to face around spending challenges around demographics.
Don't you two need to get together?
Sorry?
Unite the right.
No, we don't need to do that. We just need to with a mistake particularly we made was around immigration. We got those rules wrong in those last 2 years. We need to fix that problem. I think Kemi Badenoch is the right leader for our party. I think the policies you will see her bring forward are proper Conservative policies. We will tackle migration properly this time, and I know it's a concern to many people. I do not think.
I do not think. You promised to cut levels of net migration, and every time you failed. So why
reform are the, I do not think reform are the solution. I think we can bring forward the solutions, and then we won't need reform to try and to have that situation where people think vote for none of the above, which is effectively what you're doing. You're voting for reform.
Well, I mean, the Tories and Reform really are the same party. Reform, in many respects, is just the Conservatives.
Well, you better hope they're not, because if they are, then you're dead.
Well, they're the Conservatives in disguise.
If they unite, you're finished.
Quite often, the candidates that they put up, like Alex was a Conservative councillor for 20 years. He must believe in what the Conservatives believe, or he wouldn't have been doing that. I think the reason that trusted politics is at a low ebb is because people have not had a pay rise for a decade. We've had the worst decade for wage rises since the Great Depression of the 1930s under the Conservatives. Our National Health Service waiting lists got to record highs. Sewage is polluting all of our rivers and lakes and seas in record levels. This government is focused on sorting those problems out because it's only when people see change, not when the likes of everyone talk about change, that we can rebuild that trust. That is why we have a plan for change. That is why we need Labour councillors in town halls to work with the Labour government to make sure we bring about the change we committed to,
you heard
and the British
top.
public voted to at the last general election.
You heard at the top, we're looking at no overall control councils up and down the country.
Yeah.
Our institutions are not really built for the politics we have, are they?
They're not, and they should be. So I think right now we have a lot of people who haven't forgiven the Conservatives for the state they left the country in, and they're deeply disappointed in some of the decisions, and many of the decisions that the Labour government have taken. And people, I think, are crying out for change. People are impatient for the change that they were promised last year. I think there are many things that are broken in our politics, aside from distrust, which we know is broken. We have first past the post. That is a broken system. It forces politicians to create a clear choice by saying what they haven't got in common, by saying, I oppose what the other person does. If we had a different system, a form of proportional representation, politicians would be forced to work together, would be forced to collaborate, would be forced to say what we had in common, and we can see that right across Europe and across the world as well. I think there are problems with the toxic influence of big money in politics. I think it's a real problem that young people can't vote from the age of 16. If they could, they would be getting education in schools that would set them up for a lifetime of voting. There are lots of things we need to fix in our politics.
Adrian, I mean, how would you change politics to improve confidence in it?
Well, there's lots that needs to be done. Some people have made the points tonight that we need to have a more constructive form of politics. We need to be able to discuss here or in Parliament areas where we agree, and we need to be able to have a constructive discussion where we don't agree. We need
so would you end oppositional politics? You know,
well, I definitely feel it needs to be a lot less yaboo. I've said that lots of times. What I do also think, though, is that politics is really opening up in terms of how people are going to vote. It's clear the two-party system has broken down. I do think that's a permanent thing. If you look at what happened in the general election and right across the country now, we've got so many seats where it's a five-party fight for elections this Thursday. No one knows which way key races are going to go. So it's really clear that people do feel genuinely let down for very good reasons from two old parties that have not delivered for too long, whether it's on the NHS being overstretched, lack of affordable housing, or the fact that we're wondering, are we going to have a livable future? The question is, do people go down a reform route, which, if you look at the detail, is only really about supporting the very richest in society, or do you come behind a hopeful vision of the future, which the Greens are offering, which is about a safe environment, but about tackling inequality, rebuilding our public services and the affordable housing that we need?
I mean, aren't we looking at, you know, the reality here? 5 parties here. You 2 are on the right. You 3 are sort of on the centre-left.
I don't see that. I don't see.
That's how you're all going to link up.
Rupert Lowe, the former one of the leading protagonists within Reform, himself called Reform a protest party. When you're casting your vote on Thursday, do not use that vote to protest. Use it to elect good people like Anne Hanley, who's in Hull and East Yorkshire, who's a proven local leader, who has made sure that the East Riding is one of the fastest growing economies in parts of the UK. Or in Lincolnshire, you've got some excellent councillors. Make sure you vote for a good councillor who's going to make a difference.
What's wrong with a protest vote if you're fed up?
Sorry?
What's wrong with the protest vote?
Well, it's not that I don't understand it. I'm just saying that's not the right thing to do, because you won't get the outcomes you want.
Moving away from the 2 big parties is not about a protest vote. Across the country, we have hundreds of Green councillors who've been elected, over 40 councils where Greens are part of running the administration. We're not there for a protest. We want to make a practical difference to local communities. We're just offering a different vision for how we can protect the environment and defend local services.
Steve Reid,
I think there's absolutely no problem with giving voters plenty of choice, and there's absolutely no problem with voters choosing to use their vote for whatever reason they want. But what I hope voters will choose to do, we elected a government 10 months ago that's delivering a plan for change. We need councillors in town halls to work with us on things like sorting out the cost of living crisis, sorting out the broken National Health Service, cleaning up sewage from our rivers, lakes and seas. People have got a choice. They can vote for that change, or they can vote to go back to where we were before last July.
Absolutely, we have a choice. And we have a choice between a political class that has taken your vote for granted for far too long and new parties.
You are the political class. You've been a Conservative
We were a councillor for 20 years. How are you new?
But I'm not particularly typical of a lot of our candidates. A lot of our candidates, they're putting their head above the parapet. They're standing for common sense in the local community for the first time because they're so fed up with how the political system has treated them up till now. It's people who've got experience running businesses, working in charities.
I've got experience running a business, Alex.
We need people who are going to bring that level of different experience outside of the.
We're out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you very much
on Thursday.
Thank you, all of you.